appreciative of everyone's support. So I have to start by going back. And my mother would kill me if I didn't, so I have to. I grew up here in Washington, and I was born in Washington, D.C., because my mother moved here in 1974 to work for Bella Abzug. My mother actually was part of the early group of women in the first Women's Commission, which was established actually exactly 40 years ago this month by then President Ford, to look very seriously at the opportunities and the challenges that were facing American women at the time. And what's extraordinary about what Bella did and about what this group of women that worked with my mother did is that they created probably one of the most democratic processes this country has ever seen. Between 1974 and 1977, when the Houston Women's Conference happened, they set out to create meetings with 130,000 women in every single state and territory of the United States. And in these convenings, they were able to reach out to women across every dimension of the political, social, racial spectrum. For many of them, it was the first time they'd ever engaged in anything relative to democracy. But they convened, and they established a set of issues. They voted delegates to send to Houston in '77. And for many of the women who participated, it was one of the most seminal experiences of their lives. And I talk about this because part of what triggered the idea for All In Together is that 40 years on, my mom is digging through libraries all over this country, unearthing all the documents from that time. Because in many ways, a lot of it has been lost to history. But what they did, and the energy that they tapped in the mid-'70s was so extraordinary. So I started thinking a year ago, as my mother was telling me about what she did and the papers that she had and the experiences that she lived, I started thinking, why do the women of my generation not have the same level of energy engagement? It's a different time. We're clearly not going to be marching down Fifth Avenue. And there's all kinds of dimensions of the reality of 1974 and 75 that are profoundly changed. And in many ways, we've been enormously successful. You know, all of us are here, of course, because of so many of the opportunities that were opened for us by our mothers and by the women who did march. But that's not to say there isn't some equally pressing issues. And so what I started to think about is this kind of zeitgeist moment that I think we're in right now, which is that as enormously successful as women have been in fulfilling much of the promise that our mothers were hoping for on our behalf, there is still this kind of pent-up energy and frustration about a whole bunch of stuff that we still have to do. You know, and I think about the women's networks that I've spent countless hours speaking in front of, thanks to actually a lot of people in this room who've invited me over the years to speak at their firms. The energy of the tens of thousands of professional women working in American companies who feel that they're hitting the glass ceiling. You know, Lean In sold, what, Laura, 15 million copies, right? It touched a nerve. Anne-Marie Slaughter's famous article in The Atlantic. I mean, there's this sort of cascade of events over the last few years, and even this amazing young woman at Columbia University who's been carrying her mattress since September in protest of the sexual assault that she experienced on campus. Something has happened in America, and there is an energy there, and a passion, and a desire to see things change. But for some reason, we have not figured out how to channel that energy and passion in the ways that really can make the biggest difference. And that's really what we want to try to do with All In Together. So our vision for All In Together is actually really simple. It's really simple. All we want to do is find ways to empower American women with the tools and the resources that they need to have voice and agency and influence in America's future. It's incredibly simple. But as one of our early advisors said, it's also kind of a moonshot. It's a moonshot vision because it's so big and it's really enormous. And so as we started thinking about this and thinking about what we wanted to accomplish, a couple things became really clear. First of all, it was clear that there was no way that any small organization or even group of extraordinary people could come anywhere near accomplishing this goal without assembling an unbelievable group of supporters and without bridging some of the divides that have historically actually undermined some of the ways in which women have been able to work together to accelerate their progress. And you know, I started thinking about my mom's cohort and some of the lessons to learn from them. And as extraordinary as they were, there were a lot of challenges with working together. There were challenges with creating bipartisan collaboration. There were lots of issues that became profoundly divisive. And it's not to say that we have to all agree, but what we wanted to try to do was to see, can we learn from the past and maybe do it better, do it different, or at the very least, do it for this time, do it for right now. And that's our mission. So as I say, it's a moonshot. Our goal is to change the country. Our goal is to change the country and to make sure that women in America have voice and influence equal to their numbers. It doesn't really seem like that much to ask for, but I do know. All right, it's a friendly crowd, I can say that in this room. It doesn't seem like that much to ask for, but we know this is an enormous task. So what we started thinking about in approaching this, oh, and then I just have to say one word about bipartisanship and about why this is such a critical and important dimension of this. There are a lot of issues that women are not going to agree on. We can think of them all in a heartbeat. But I think what we can all agree is that there is enormous value and importance to women's voices. And no matter what other policy dimension we may disagree on, and I'm sure most of you in the room know where my personal politics have been through most of my life, I think that I believe that if you believe in amplifying women's voices, you believe in amplifying them, whether or not you agree with everything they say when they speak up. And we are deeply committed to this. And I will tell you, really some of the most extraordinary experiences we've had over this past year as we've tried to build this group has been as we've built relationships, particularly with some really amazing, and I say because for us it was in some ways new, with extraordinary Republican women. Because I will say, as we all know, so much of our lives today have separated into parties. When I grew up in Washington, our entire neighborhood was entirely Democrat until Nick Callio moved to our corner. There went the neighborhood, according to all the Peace Corps volunteers that were lining our street in Chevy Chase, right? But it's true, we do live like this today. We do live like this today, and so much of our politics and so much of our lives have been so divided. This is insane. And one of the inspirations for me around this bipartisanship really was thanks in large part to Senator Gillibrand, who's coming today. Because 7 months ago, I sat at Women of the World in New York and heard Susan Collins and Senator Gillibrand talk about the extraordinary partnership the two of them had forged in the Senate and what they had been able to accomplish together and how they had broken the standoff and the government shutdown together. And I thought, this is what we have to do. How could we possibly think to advance American women if we can't work with each other on such a fundamental principle? So we are committed to this. And as hard as it is, and we know it's complicated, we're committed, and we're sticking with it. So just briefly about our goals for today. This is the beginning of a journey. And what we always said was that, look, we bring a particular set of experiences to this issue, but I do not have a political background. Everyone in this room has more experience than we do on a lot of these issues. We need your collaboration, we need your insights, and today is no exception. So our goal really is to have a conversation today, and there are a lot of people in the room who've worked very hard on these issues for a long time, so we will be asking for your input. And we are going to also do a little bit of definition and talk a little bit about what success could look like and how we move forward. But fundamentally, this is about collaboration. It has always been, it will always will be, and it absolutely is today. So we will encourage you to speak up and speak with us. So just really briefly, as we thought about this question of where did we go wrong? How did we go from millions of women participating in all kinds of advancement and action to where we are today, where we do have extraordinary examples of women leading. I'm going to take a pause to welcome Representative Elise Stefanik. Thank you so much for joining us. So Representative Stefanik needs no introduction because I know everyone in the room knows who she is. She is the youngest woman ever elected to the House of Representatives. We're really thrilled that you could be here. Thank you so much. So thank you. So as we thought about this problem, one thing became really obvious to us. We spend all this time working with women's groups and at women's leadership events. And what you realize very quickly, if you notice, is that in all of our conversations about women's leadership, we have lost part of the focus. And what I mean by that is that if you've attended a Fortune Most Powerful Women's Conference, or you've attended a Glamour conference, or a Marie Claire conference, or any of the other women's conferences, and they're all fabulous, Women of the World, any number of conferences, the vast majority of the discussions that we are having with women about leadership are about getting a top job. It is about the seat you occupy. And so much of that has become the focus that I would argue we've actually lost a whole other piece of the puzzle. Now, it is enormously important. No one in this room is going to disagree that we need more women in leadership roles. We do, and we need them leading our companies. We need them leading our organizations. But if the message that we are giving women over and over again is that the only way to lead is by getting a top job, I fear we are then giving a message to many, many women who either don't aspire to those jobs, who will never reach those jobs. We are essentially telling them that's the only way. And I think that's a shame, because as Courtney is going to share with you, there's unbelievable data about the energy and passion that women have to do right in their communities, to give back, to have meaning and purpose in their lives, and to lead. And yet over and over again, we're saying that leadership is the seat you occupy. So what we want to try to do is to change that conversation and to say that leadership is accessible to anyone, no matter where you sit, no matter what job you hold, no matter what you do with your life. And the way that leadership is accessible to you, no matter what job you have, is because we have a democracy. We live in a democracy where everyone's voice counts. And that our democracy offers an unbelievable opportunity for anyone, no matter who they are or where they sit, to lead by speaking up and holding their representatives accountable for what they care about. And that is really the crux of what the gap we want to try to fill with All In Together. So look, we're doing really well, and we know this. There are tremendous positive signs around how well women are doing. And if we look across these three dimensions, the personal, the professional, the political, there's amazing signs on all three, right? Women have now been out-earning men on college campuses for a long time. We are winning the majority of the advanced degrees in American universities. We are educated at greater numbers than we could have ever imagined even 25 years ago. And while there are clearly exceptions in fields like STEM, as Jenny pointed out, in all kinds of fields, I mean, in the life sciences, 60% of the medical degrees today are going to women, right? Across almost every field and discipline, women are actually outperforming men. So incredible realization of potential there. And professionally, the numbers are unbelievable in terms of the numbers of women who are now out-earning their spouses and who are becoming primary breadwinners. It's now up to about 38%. And among college-educated women, that number is even larger. So some of the battles that obviously were fought for years ago have been won. We're succeeding on many of those fronts. And then, of course, as most of you in the room know, when it comes to presidential campaigns, when it comes to major elections, women have turned every election since 1980. We are showing up to vote. We are out registering men, and we are showing up to vote in extraordinary numbers. So these are all incredibly positive and good signs. So what's the problem? Which I'll let Courtney talk about. On the professional front, look, I mean, you know all of this, but the thing that's amazing is that the data is now really conclusive, which is that women are as ambitious as men in almost every field. They aspire to leadership and they aspire to impact at the same rates, if not higher rates, than men. And they prioritize community service. They see giving back and making the world better as a fundamental part of what it means to be successful. And that's an extraordinary and unique dimension of what it is, of what women are offering the country. But the problem, which Courtney is going to talk about, is that despite all of this passion to heal the planet and to give back, there is a massive disconnect between that desire to do right in the world and to make the world better and a sense that political engagement is a way to do that. It's broken. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Courtney to talk a little bit about some of the challenges.
Great. Thanks. I don't know if many of you know this. Lauren actually convinced me to join the Center for Talent Innovation 5 years ago. And it seems I've been following her around ever since to my benefit. So I'm in the unenviable position today of following her speaking, which is always a tough act to follow, but we'll do my best. I'm also going to mention, as the resident millennial, we do have a hashtag for anyone tweeting today. It's AIT Launch 2015. It's on your 10 cards. And while we're on that subject, I am just going to address the elephant in the room and say the thing that you're never supposed to say, which is my age. I'm turning 28 this weekend. And so this is truly a dream for me. This is something that Lauren and I have been so passionate about over the past year, and I'm really in awe. It's pretty surreal to be in front of such an amazing group of women. And this is a topic that for me comes very close to home and to my heart. I was raised by a mother who was a civil engineer in the 1970s in a steel mine in Indiana, and really rejected that gender was a limitation for any kind of success in one's career. I also grew up in the great state of New Hampshire. Anyone else from New Hampshire? No? Just me? That's pretty typical. New Hampshire has an incredible history of women's leadership in political and civic life. And in 2012, they became the first state with an all-female congressional delegation. So it's been my lot in life to be surrounded by incredible women and men, and today is really no exception. So thank you all so much for being here. So as Lauren said, I do want to dive very briefly, so we have time for our wonderful panel we have planned today, into some of the challenges we see when it comes to political and civic engagement. And even with a record 100 women in Congress today, we are still lagging far, far behind. The World Economic Forum ranked the United States number 54 when it comes to political empowerment and gender equality. And this is obvious to everyone. 66% of men and women agree that there is currently inequality between men and women in terms of social, political, and economic rights. So this isn't news to anyone. But we wanted to explore the gender gap beyond just voting and running for office, and there are some incredible organizations out there preparing women to lead, Running Start, Vote, Run, Lead, that do amazing, tremendous work in developing female leaders. But we wanted to explore the gender gap even deeper. And Lauren and I were blown away when we saw that the challenges we see in political engagement are the same in every sphere. They're the same as the challenges we see in professional life. They're the same as the challenges we see in women's personal lives. Confidence, which, again, a contentious topic, interest, and bias. A lot of the same challenges. But these challenges emerge when women enter college. We don't see these gaps in high school. But something's happening, college-age women, where these gender gaps are emerging very strongly. Women are less likely to take political courses, less likely to enjoy talking about politics, less likely to visit political news websites. And this is a cyclical issue, right? It affects ambition, it affects confidence, to the point where it's really starting to show when it comes to our leadership numbers. And I want to focus, there's some pretty astounding statistics on this slide, but I want to focus on two things, the confidence gap and the giving gap. So the confidence gap, first of all, is important when we look at running for office, right? Feeling confident that you would ever be qualified to run for office. And we see that there are differences between men and women, and feeling that they would even be good enough to hack it, right? But the confidence issue is a problem in a bunch of other spheres as well. If you're not confident that your voice matters, you're not going to engage in a conversation that might be seen as contentious or controversial. You're not going to stand up and state your opinion. And the giving back gap, although Lauren and I are not campaign finance experts, we know that politics and money, they matter, they go together. And we know that money and donations really impacts how elections are decided and who ends up in office. And women are only about 30% of the donations totaled in 2012. There's some discrepancies here when we look at female representatives and female senators. Women are more likely to give to women running for office, but still a pretty big gap. And all these micro inequities really start to matter when we look at agency and impact. So there's no longer a gender gap when we think about duty-driven participation, voting, showing up for town hall meetings, supporting a candidate for election. In 2012, Obama's staff said that 60% of their volunteers were female. So women are showing up and helping support some of these efforts, but they're not speaking up. There was an amazing study done in Vermont. I'm being a little New England biased today, but they did a study of over 1,500 town hall meetings, and they found that while women made up about half of the attendees, they made up only about a quarter of the speakers. That's a huge discrepancy. And there's also some evidence that shows that when they do speak up, they're actually less likely to be heard as well. So there's diminishing returns on women's attendance to a lot of these meetings. We also see that that members of Congress receive about 2 million more letters and calls from their male constituents compared to their female constituents every year. That adds up. And when it comes to op-ed submissions to prestigious publications like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, the numbers range about 10 to 20%, but women still in the far minority in terms of who's writing these op-eds. So why does this matter? The Congressional Management Foundation, Susie Gordon is here from the CMF, has done some amazing research on what influences members of Congress and what helps them understand what their members' priorities are. It's showing up at town hall meetings, it's writing to Congress, it's having meetings with members of Congress on the Hill, and women just aren't doing these things. So how can women's unique voices and agendas be represented in Congress when they're not speaking up to the representatives about what they are prioritizing and what's most important to them? This is one of our favorite cartoons. It really speaks for itself in terms of some of the challenges here. But again, as Lauren said, we want to learn from all of you today. This is not just a conversation that we want to have up on this stage, but with amazing experts in the room today. So I'm going to hand it over back to Lauren to have a conversation, and then we have an amazing panel coming up in just a minute.
Thanks, Courtney. Thank you. Thanks. I know. It's a testament to this room that somebody's getting a text in a few minutes with this cartoon. It's really one of my favorites. So look, before we start the panel, I did want to spend a few minutes in conversation because this room is extraordinary. Look, there's a lot that we still need to know, and there's remarkably little research that's been done in any deep way on women's engagement in the political process. There are polls that get done around election season, but generally the research is pretty thin. So we do hope to eventually do a nationally representative survey. We've actually been talking with CMF about possibly doing it together, doing something that pairs, for instance, how representatives on the Hill, and particularly their LDs, develop their opinions and develop their policy based on feedback, but then also to look at the disconnects with average Americans in terms of how they see their ability to have influence. But I want to take a pause for a second and really just open this up for some conversation, because many of you have spent your careers working on these issues. And what have we missed? I mean, is there anything that we haven't tackled or that we've missed in terms of some of these big gaps? What have you seen work? What have you seen not work? We're going to hear from our panel a little bit about their own experiences, but I mean, many of you in the room have worked on extensive campaigns. I mean, I'm looking at you, Tamara, but thoughts on is this lining up with your experience? What has been your experience in terms of seeing what's worked and not worked in terms of engaging women in the process? Oh, sorry, could you take the mic so we can, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's on. You want to introduce yourself?
I'm Tamara Luzzatto. I am now the Senior Vice President for Government Relations, which means a version of kind of advocacy strategies at Pew Charitable Trusts. The recent cartoon took my interest in that I was Senator Hillary Clinton's Chief of Staff for her 8 years in the Senate. I wanted to actually get a photo of that and send it to her. So if you keep it there.
I'll leave it.
You know, I also was a teenager. You, of course, were maybe in the womb in the 70s, but when Mayor Lindsay would shut the Madison Avenue down so that we could all protest the war and fight for women's rights and civil rights, et cetera. So that's very much my launch pad for how I've ended up doing everything I've done. But I think in general, to me, overall, when you think of getting to equality and justice and fighting discrimination, that we need to we need to call out negatively and positively to when people of influence, people who hire HR departments, executives, are self-aware and stop and look at the picture of how few women are in their panels, their faculties, their boards, et cetera. So I mean, a starting question is everyone should say, is there anything wrong with this picture? Because we sort of can tell who's a woman, who's a minority, et cetera, and that I think is I think it connects all of your categories.
And I know many of you may be aware of this really sort of fun new organization with a very serious mission, Gender Avenger, which Tamara has just introduced me to the founder, and that's actually what they're trying to do, is even just create a media platform for calling out in public spheres where women are not being represented on major panels, on boards, et cetera.
So to repeat, Gender Avenger has a blog and is on Facebook, and if you see one of those panels, like the Wall Street Journal full-page ad, where it's 8 men and maybe will be moderated by a woman, grab that link, put it on the site, and guess what? The next panel is going to have 3 women. So, as is our experience in seriousness. Yeah. And we also applaud those that deserve positive attention.
So the thing that we've started to experience as we've started to go out and talk to women about this, and we're just at the beginning, so we've just done a few events where we've gone out publicly and started to talk about this. I actually spoke at a Deloitte event a few weeks ago in Texas. Many of you may know that part of what enables me to do this work is incredible support from Deloitte, in that I also work with them as an advisor and work with many of their clients part-time. So I was speaking at a Deloitte event recently with a group of, I think it was 70 women MBAs from all of the top schools around the country. And I did some of this presentation. And what I heard from them, and now these are women at a lot of the elite schools, what I heard from them is, we are dying to do something. Tell us what to do. Give us an outlet. Give us a set of resources. And I am not saying that I think everyone in the country is ready to get up and act. I think we still have a lot of work to do on that front. And that's why some of what we want to try to do is even just persuade women to make the connect, that if they're passionate about public service, if they're passionate about giving back to their communities, that they should see public policy and political engagement as a way to do that. But there are still huge numbers of women who actually really care and want to be involved and have not found the right ways to do it. We have to bring it to them, I think, in some kind of new way that makes it palatable. I mean, many of you here have worked on campaigns. I'd love to hear more from the room about what you've seen. I mean, actually, Elise, would you mind saying a few words about, I wanted to ask you also about what motivated you early on, and what it was about you that empowered you to feel like you were ready to run and that you wanted to take that on at such an early point in your career. Do you want to just take the mic?
Sure.
Oh, you already have.
Oh, I am mic'd.
Oh, you have
okay.
it. You're good.
I think that given my experience in public policy and having worked on campaigns, I had the opportunity to do so at both more junior levels and senior levels. And for me, the outcome of the 2012 elections, I personally was disappointed, but politics aside, it was a real crystallizing moment when I decided we need to be having new voices a part of the discussion. We need new types of candidates. And instead of the same type of cookie-cutter candidates, I really took a long time assessing, I think, not only what New York State needed, but also generationally what Congress needs to think outside of the box, to be willing to work across the aisle on these issues. But it was an extraordinarily uphill battle. Knowing what I know now, and I look back when I first announced my campaign, if I had known that information, I was so naive at that point that I'm not sure I would have been able to get in the race, because it was such an uphill climb when there were so many naysayers. But I do have to say that one of the most helpful aspects when I was formulating my decision to run was going to mentors and talking to people that I had worked with, both men and women, who believed in me, saw me grow professionally as an individual, and encouraged me. It allowed me to counterbalance all of the naysayers. And I think having a supportive family network and network of friends is extraordinarily important, especially with some of the unique challenges that women candidates face with critiques on their appearance or their clothing that male candidates don't go through.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Thank you so much, Elise. And look, part of what I think we want to, I'm so glad you mentioned mentors. Welcome, Senator Gillibrand. I'm glad you mentioned mentors, because part of it, we'll talk after the panel a little bit about our goals in terms of getting professional women to also mentor women on campus, in terms of finding ways to be involved civically and politically. And as part of our goal, we think it's absolutely essential that we create those links. So I'm just going to say maybe 2 more minutes worth, and then we'll welcome up our panel, because Representative Stefanak is on short timing today, as is Senator Gillibrand. But I just want to say a few words about what we're trying to do. Our goal really is to address all of these major gender gaps in our work, fundamentally around bias. And we know we can't cure bias, but we want to start a serious national conversation about the role women can and should be playing in our public policy, in our public discourse, and in our in politics generally. This is a critical time. The presidential election is upon us. It's maybe never been more important that we amplify this discussion and have a serious conversation in the media and publicly around why women need to see political leadership as such a critical part of leading and why the political establishment needs to take women more seriously. Secondly, on confidence, we know that part of what helps women work through some of their confidence challenges around these issues is creating safe communities where they can work together to learn. So we will be a convener. And our goal is to bring together women, to give them a safe space to understand policy, to learn about how the political process works in our democracy, and give them the opportunities to work with each other. Ambition, Elise talked about role models, hugely important. And we're going to be calling on women across the country to really role model some of these behaviors for younger women, to highlight success stories of women who have successfully made an impact in public policy. And then finally, interest. We want to create a series of fabulous forums that excites women about the possibility of participating in our political process in a meaningful and serious way. We'll talk more about that. We're very excited in particular, and I'll give Charity after the panel, I'll give Charity Wallace a chance to speak about it, that the Bush Center is very kindly offered to welcome us this fall to do a forum on women and democracy, and we're really excited to do that. I think it's going to be a great beginning of that journey. So with that, I'd like to welcome, we'll come back to this since I'd like to welcome our extraordinary and distinguished panel, all of whom really need no introduction. First of all, Anne Fullenwider, who I introduced before, the indomitable editor-in-chief of Marie Claire. And if you haven't picked up a Marie Claire recently, you really should, not just because we're in it in the January issue, thank you, although that helps. So thank you, Anne. But because Marie Claire, maybe more than any other magazine, has done an extraordinary job bringing very serious topics to young women and asking them to think deeply about a range of issues that they're not always asked to think about. Of John Grzerma, the CEO of BAV Consulting, which is an arm of Young and Rubicam. John is the author of an amazing book many of you have read called The Athena Doctrine. He has been a big supporter of ours from early on. He's also on the board of Girl Up, which is part of the UN Foundation, and has looked at how women's political leadership around the world can make a difference. Senator Kristen Gillibrand. And Senator Gillibrand, you missed it. I said earlier that your panel last year with Susan Collins at Women of the World was actually one of the big inspirations for this and for our bipartisanship efforts. So we're thrilled to have you. Of course, no one else in Congress perhaps has taken more of a serious leadership role on women's issues. Nancy Lamond of AARP. I don't want to steal Anne's thunder. Many of you know AARP, 25 million members. Is that a low number? 38. Oh, I knew I'd get it wrong. Thank you, Craig, for keeping me honest. 38 million members, and what's extraordinary, of course, about AARP is a huge percentage of those members are women, and they are enormously politically active. So lots to learn there. And then, of course, Representative Elise Stefanik, who we introduced earlier. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel and welcome them.